بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today is lesson number 6, the sixth lesson in our series on al-Qadar, and it is lesson number 41 overall in our discussion of this book, Taqrib al-Tadmuriyah of Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah. So just as a recap of what we've discussed so far, we are speaking about the Qadar of Allah, the Qadar of Allah. And in the first lesson, we defined what this means. We said when we say al-Qadar, which in English is the divine pre-decree, or Allah's prior determination of all things, and Allah's knowledge of all things prior to them happening. This is what we mean by al-Qadar, the decree of Allah. Allah's prior knowledge of all that has been and that will be. So after that, we then went on to look at the 4 levels of al-Qadar. What does it comprise, al-Qadar? We said that first of all, Allah has prior knowledge of all things. Secondly, that knowledge has been written down in a preserved tablet, in a book. Thirdly, when Allah wills something to happen, He wills it to happen. And fourthly, it comes about by way of His creative power, right? So at the point when something is going to happen, so for example, when a leaf falls from the tree, that is in Allah's prior knowledge and it has been written down. And Allah wills for it to fall at the precise time it falls, and it falls through the creative power of Allah. Right? Allah has put within the creation ways and means, causes and effects. So thus, when the sun departs to the south and the heat is no longer present and the sunlight is no longer present and the vegetation, the trees, whatever, they lose their source of, what gives them life, and they slowly start to degrade and wither, right? All of that is by Allah's creation, by the causes and the effects He placed in the creation. So when any event occurs, that is Allah's act of creation, because He put the ways and means, causes and effects. So when anything happens, it is by Allah's will and it is by His creative power, right? And all of that is what we mean by al-Qadar. The knowledge, prior knowledge, the writing of that knowledge, everything is written. Until even the falling of a leaf from a tree, it is written, it's in a book. Thirdly, Allah's will, when He wills for something to happen. And fourth, it is His creative power that led that thing to happen. So He is the creator of all things that happen. And all of those 4 things together, they comprise al-Qadar, right? So we discussed that in the second and third lesson. Then, in the 4th lesson, we started looking at the asbab, or the ways and the means. And we said that the ways and means are part and parcel of al-Qadar, the ways and means. And what we mean by the ways and means, the asbab, we mean that when we look at the created things, we see Allah has created entities, beings, things. He has put attributes in those things, and He has put properties in those things. And how Allah's creation functions is by way of those things. So this means that the Qadar of Allah, what Allah knows is going to happen, what He's written down is going to happen, what He wills to happen, and what He makes to happen, then it is by way of the asbab, right? So to give you an example, water, for example, Allah created water. Water has many different properties. Water has life-giving properties. Water quenches thirst. Water, there are so many other things, properties and functions of water. So when a person drinks the water, his thirst is quenched. And so Allah made the quenching of thirst to be by way of water, right? And so by extension, to every other thing in the creation which is a cause and which has an effect, then everything that takes place from al-Qadar, then it happens by way of the causes and their effects, right? So there are causes and their effects. There are ways and means, which means that we believe in the causes and their effects, right? So we have to believe that Allah created things and those things have properties, and that whatever happens is through those properties, right? So we don't deny the causes, but we do not say that, these causes act independently, because they only act by the permission of Allah, because Allah is the one who gave these properties to things. And nor do we say, on the other hand, that the causes do not have any effect, right? Like we discussed the groups in that lesson. We said, on the one hand, there are some groups like the Ash'aris, they deny the inherent properties of things, right? So they say, for example, if you drink water and then your thirst is quenched, it wasn't the water that quenched your thirst, but it's just that Allah, He created the feeling of your thirst being quenched at the same time to coincide with drinking the water, even though it had nothing to do with the water. That's what they say. This is false. This is not correct, right? Or they would say, for example, the fire, when you have the fire and it burns the wood, it wasn't the fire that burnt the wood, it's that Allah created the effect of the burning of the wood to coincide with the fire being present. This is sophistry and foolishness, and we don't believe this is not true, right? Because we believe Allah has indeed put properties in things, inherent properties in things, in molecules, in substances, in whatever. And those properties are part and parcel of the effect, right? So they do play a role in the effect, but they only have the effect by Allah's permission. What do we mean by Allah's permission? We mean that there are other things which also have to be present for that thing to have the effect, right? So without oxygen, there is no fire. In the presence of salt, there is no removal of thirst. So even though things have properties, right, those properties can be invalidated by other things, right? So fire is, if there's no longer any oxygen, the fire will go, right? In the presence of salt, the water is no longer thirst quenching, and so on and so forth. So basically what we are saying here, we are taking the correct position. We are saying that we believe that there are causes and effects, and things which are created have been given properties and qualities by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a result of which effects come to be. But these things are all by the permission of Allah, and there is no ultimate cause except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Every other thing besides Allah needs something other than itself for it to be, or for it to have an effect. And that's true in the creation. There is no thing that we see except that it requires other factors for it to be. For example, a seed, if you leave it on the sill, it's not going to grow by itself. You need it in the soil. But the soil itself is not sufficient. You also need rain. But the rain itself is not sufficient. You need the sunlight. That too is not sufficient. You need the right temperature, which is from spring onwards, right? So all of these things are interconnected. And there's nothing in creation except that it needs other things for it to be. So the only being who is Allah, who is Al-Ghani, the one who is free of all need, right? He is the ultimate cause of all things. So to come to the point, we believe in the causes and their effects. We believe in the inherent properties of things. Things have inherent properties. Those properties indeed cause the effect, right? But not on their own. They only do so because Allah put those properties in there, and when the right factors are combined, then it will have its effect. So we affirm the causes and their effects, and we believe Allah Azza wa Jal is the one who put them there, right? This is different to the materialists, the atheists, the naturalists. What they say is, they say, we can explain everything by way of the inherent properties of things. We do not need a creator to explain anything, right? So they claim and they say that, we know how the fire burns, we know how the water quenches thirst, we know the molecular basis of all of that, we know the properties, and so we don't need a creator now to explain because we understand the function of. But this is a sophistry. It's like saying that since we know the mechanics of an engine, then we don't need the creator of the engine, because we understand that one doesn't follow from the other. Just because you understand the mechanics of how a engine works, for example, it does not mean that the engine doesn't have any creator or maker. So in the same way, within biology, within chemistry, within what we study, what we learn, the informational basis of biology, the whole of biology is actually an information science. It's about information. That by necessity means there is a maker, right? And just because you understand the mechanics and the physics of it all does not mean that you can dismiss the creator and the maker who is behind it, right? So basically, there are those who exaggerate in the properties of things and say we don't need a creator to explain the causes and their effects, right? So these are the atheists, the materialists, the naturalists, and in that direction. Then over here you have among the Muslims, those who deny causation in Allah's creation, right? They deny that things have been given properties which then have effects. And they are the Ash'aris, right? Amongst the sects of the Muslims, they are the Ash'aris who deny, there are things which have the power of causation. So we are in the middle, as we said. So we discussed this in lesson 3 and 4. And in the previous lesson, now all of this is leading to, there's a certain flow and a direction that we are going in. All of this now leads us to, which is where we finished in the past lesson, the issue of man himself, right? So we as humans, because al-Qadar, the issue of Allah's decree, and Allah having prior knowledge of our actions, then an issue is raised about, well, if Allah has prior knowledge of our actions and He wills and decrees our actions, how then are we held accountable for these actions? And are we really forced to do our actions, or are we free and are we outside of Allah's will and His power to do as we please, right? So these questions now arise in relation to the actions of men, right? So this is what we're going to discuss. This is the point where we got to in the previous lesson, because we discussed the issue of the causes. So all of that should now be clear, right? With respect to the asbab. So the point that we finished off in the previous lesson is that we said we are basically now moving across a bridge from discussing the causes and their effects in relation to all things besides man, right? Now we are discussing the issue of man and his actions. And the connection between the two is that there is no difference between the things that we've discussed and between man and his will and his power. So let me just illustrate. So we said, let's take water, for example. Within water, this molecule, there are certain properties and qualities. Those properties and qualities allow water to perform certain functions, right? The quenching of thirst, the revival of the earth. So when the water comes down into the soil, then there's other factors in the soil. You have bacteria, you have other things, and that enables that function to then eventually lead to life. So just like with water, we treat, and anything else in Allah's creation, we treat man and his properties and his attributes to be exactly the same. Right? The discussion is exactly the same. So the Shaykh says, and this is where we start today's lesson from, إذا كان القدر لا ينافي الأسباب الكونية والشرعية فهو لا ينافي أن يكون للعبد إرادة وقدرة ويكون بهما فعله فهو مريد قادر فاعل لقوله تعالى. So he says, since we know that al-Qadar, when we believe in al-Qadar, this does not negate that there are asbab, there are causes and effects through which the Qadar of Allah comes to be. Right? So, just like belief in the asbab, belief in al-Qadar doesn't negate the asbab, likewise, when we believe in al-Qadar, it does not negate the fact that we have a will and we have power by which our actions come to be. In other words, Allah Azza wa Jal has put within our bodies, or He has given us certain attributes, the attribute of will, the irada, the desire to do something, and likewise the qudra, the physical ability to do things. And our actions arise from these two things. When we have a desire and we have the actual ability, then actions will arise from us. And Allah has put these properties within man. Right? And then He mentioned some verses from the Quran. Minkum man yuridu dunya wa minkum man yuridu al-akhirah. Among you is one who desires the world, and amongst you is one who desires the hereafter. So we have irada. We have the attribute of irada. And likewise, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ فَعَلُوا مَا يُوعَظُونَ بِهِ لَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُمْ وَأَشَدَّ تَثْبِيتًا. If only they did that which they were admonished with, it would have been better for them. Which shows man is able to do, meaning to act. And man amila salihan فَلِنَفْسِهِ. Whoever does a righteous deed, it is for his own benefit. Which means man has the ability to do, to act, to work. So these are qualities of man. He has irada, he has fi'l, he has an act, he has amal, he's able to work, do deeds. He has qudra, he has the power and ability. All of these are traits and qualities of man, in the same way that Allah put the quality of hardness in, for example, in steel or metal or in the wood, or just like He put properties in every other thing. This is how He made man, insan, right? He gave him an irada and He gave him a qudra. So after this, the Shaykh goes on to say, لَكِنَّهُ غَيْرُ مُسْتَقِلٌ بِإِرَادَتِهِ وَقُدْرَتِهِ وَفِعْلِهِ. However, man is not independent in his will and his power and his action, in the same way that all the other asbab that we discussed, right? كما لا تستقل الأسباب بالتأثير في مسبباتها. Just in the same way as all the other causes, like we discussed, they are not independent in having their effect, right? So just like we said, if you take a seed and you plant the seed, we have the seed, we have the soil. But without other things, you are not going to have any vegetation. So you have to have water. And water is from the creation of Allah. And you have to have the sun and its light and its warmth, which is also from the creation of Allah. So the seed, even though it has inherent properties within it of, the DNA or the RNA or whatever, however the system works, the information for it to become what it is going to become, right? Even though that has all that stuff in there, it still needs other things from Allah's Qadar, from the other things Allah created for it to actually have the effect, right? So it cannot be independent in its effect. You can't put a seed on the windowsill and expect it to give you, vegetation and whatever, 2-3 months down. It's not going to happen, right? So in exactly the same way, Allah has put within man the irada and the qudra, the will and the ability through which his act comes to be. But he is not independent in his ability to act, right? He can only act if Allah allows through other means for him to act. And he will only have the desire, the will to do something if Allah allows through other means for him to actually have the will to do something, right? So as Allah says in the Quran, لِمَنْ شَاءَ مِنْكُمْ مَنْ يَسْتَقِيمُ وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَنْ يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. You will not will, for whoever amongst you wills to be upright, but you will not will except as Allah wills, the Lord of the worlds. Right? So, because we know the irada, the will, and the qudra, the power, these are a man's attributes. And a man is created, therefore his attributes are also created. So if he's created and his attributes are created, then everything he does is also a creation of Allah, right? So from this discussion, what the important thing is to understand that just like we discussed all the other created things, right? Like water, like the air, like rock, like stone, like fire, every other entity which is inanimate, it has properties, it has qualities, it has functions, then man is exactly the same, right? He also is created, and he also has attributes, traits and qualities through which his action and his function comes to be, right? However, just like the other things, he cannot do, he cannot act, he cannot will, except that Allah wills and Allah, allows that to happen. So meaning that man is completely under the knowledge, the will, and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He does not exit from that. Nothing comes outside of that, right? And so we affirm that he actually does have the will and the power to do things, and we affirm that all of that actually is from the will and the power of Allah, just like with everything else. So, the Shaykh, okay, now let's just pause at this point. Let's stop at this point now before we go further. And let's just make sure that we understand the right thing. So basically, let's go back now. So as we said before, there's three groups. There's one group here who's negating the causes and their effects, right? So here we have the Ash'aris who are saying, when you drink the water, it's not the water that's quenching the thirst. The water is just coincidental. But Allah has created His creation in such a way that when you drink the water, Allah will, in real time, create the feeling of quenching the thirst to coincide with you drinking the water, right? But it had nothing to do with the water. It's Allah creating the actual quenching of thirst. The reason why they are saying this is because they wrongly believe that if we give any power or property to the water, we've now claimed that there is a power other than the power of Allah. This is false reasoning. It's not true, right? Because Allah is the one who put the power in this in the first place. So even if this thing has the effect, it is Allah who's the creator of the effect. So that's redundant, right? So they are over here, right? Then over this side we have, the naturalists, the atheists, the materialists, and what they are saying, well, we can explain everything by the inherent properties of things. We don't need a creator to explain anything. So because we know water, the molecule H2O has a certain property, has a certain shape, has certain qualities, we now know and understand how it does whatever it does, right? So because we understand that, we can explain everything by the inherent properties of things. We don't need a creator. This is also false because, the properties of things have been endowed with properties, right? So there has to be one who gave the properties, right? So they are on this side. Now, moving on from that and putting man and his actions and having the same discussion to do with man and his actions, then we also have three groups, right? So we have over this side here, we have the Jahmiyyah and the Ash'aris, and what they are saying in relation to man and his actions, that man does not have any ability or any power to do anything. He is forced to do what he does, right? So they are denying that we have free will and the ability and the power to do our actions, right? So they're basically saying it's like, when you have a leaf and the wind blows, the leaf has no choice but to just move in the wind, right? Right? This is how a man is, right? Allah has decreed things upon him. Those things are going to happen whether he likes it or not, right? And they don't happen by way of his will or his choice. He's forced to do what he does, right? This is on this side here. Then on the other extreme, on the other side, there are the Mu'tazila. And what they say is that man and his actions are completely outside the domain of Allah's will and his power. Meaning that what we do, it's not Allah who's willing it or creating it. So we are completely outside of the control and the power of Allah Azza wa Jal. We are doing things completely independently with our own will and with our power. It's outside of Allah's. So meaning that there is within this creation things over which Allah has no power. Do you understand? Meaning Allah has no power over our actions. So we are outside of Allah's creative power, right? So these are mistakes when it comes to man and his actions, right? And this mistake follows on from the mistake in relation to the material causes and their effects that we just discussed, right? They're making the same mistake. What we should be saying, what the correct view and position is that it is Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah gave us the will and the power. He gave us these properties. And therefore, because these are our attributes, and our attributes are created just like we are created, then everything we choose and we do, then it is within the will and the creative power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We never ever are outside of Allah's creative power, right? So yes, our actions are by our will and our power, but that will and power has been endowed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just in the same way as the water quenches the thirst because it has some inherent properties and powers, but those inherent properties and powers have actually been endowed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So there's no issue and there's no problem in affirming any of that. Okay, so the Shaykh goes on to elaborate upon this issue. So he says, وَهَؤُلَاءِ الْجَبَرِيَّ يَقُولُونَ لَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِرَادَةٌ وَلَا قُدْرَةٌ وَلَا فِعْلٌ لأنك لو أثبت له إرادة وفعلا وجعلت فعله نتيجة لإرادته وقدرته لكنت كافرا بالقدر. Meaning, so those people who say, well, we can't say that a man has a will and a power, because if you were to say that, you've now denied al-Qadar. You've denied al-Qadar. Right? But this does not follow. This does not follow. If I say that in this water is the power to quench thirst, I have not denied al-Qadar, because Allah is the one who put that in there. He decreed for that power to be in there. How can you say I'm a denier of al-Qadar? Right? If I say, like, if Allah has decreed before creating the creation that a certain man at a certain time in a certain place, he will be thirsty, and then he drinks the water and he, the thirst is quenched by that water, how can you say that if I say, well, the water has been given certain properties and qualities by which thirst is quenched, how can you now say I've denied al-Qadar? How have I denied al-Qadar? Well, I haven't denied al-Qadar. Because what I'm saying is that yes, Allah decreed before He created the creation that man at that time, at that place, his thirst is going to be quenched, but it's going to be by water which Allah put the property of quenching thirst, and he drank it and the thirst was quenched. How have I denied Allah's prior knowledge, or Him writing it down, or Him willing it, or Him bringing it about? How have I denied that? Because, as we said, all of what happens in creation is by way of the ways and the means. The ways and the means are part and parcel of al-Qadar. Right? They do not negate al-Qadar. But al-Qadar happens by way of the ways and the means, the asbab. Right? So this is their argument. And the Shaykh goes on to obviously refute this kind of argument. And so as we said, he goes on to discuss like the three groups. Those who say the causes have no effects at all, they are the Ash'aris over here. And then there are those who exaggerate and they say everything happens only through the causes, by the inherent powers of causes. They are the atheists and the naturalists and people like that. But when it comes to the actions of men, then we have one group over here that denies man has any will and power, not independent, but he has any will and power through which his actions come to be. They are the Ash'aris. And over here you have the Mu'tazila, who say man creates his own actions. They are outside of Allah's will and His control. They are the Mu'tazila. Okay, so moving on from that point. To conclude this point, what do we say then in conclusion? We say that the properties Allah put in things, they do have an effect, right? But that effect is subject to the permission of Allah, to the will of Allah, so it's not independent in having its effect, right? So that's the basic point that we are making, right? So anyway, this is the first point of today's lesson, right? That we understand man and his qualities and his actions, we treat it to be the same as all the other causes and their effects. There's no difference. We now move to the second issue now. Okay, so the second issue that's connected to this is that the qadar is from Allah, right? So we know that everything that happens is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how can you say al-qadar khayruhu wa sharruhu, right? So part of our belief, the 6 pillars of belief, is to believe in Allah, in His angels and His books and His messengers, and al-qadar khayruhu wa sharruhu, right? The good and the evil of al-qadar, the good and the evil, and then the last day. So a question arises, how can you say the good and the evil. Okay, we understand the good, that Allah decrees the good. But as for when you say the evil, then how can this be? How can there be, how can there be evil in Allah's decree, in what Allah decrees? Right? So now this is a second issue that we're going to discuss in today's lesson. Before I move on, is there anything, any question related to the first, to do with man's actions? Is that all clear? Yeah.
What did they say about the intention, before you actually do the action?
Yeah.
Do you think that that's created separately as
well? Well, yes, that's outside. According to the Mu'tazila, they say that is outside of Allah's creative power. So when the man has the irada and he has the intention to do something, it has to come completely from himself, outside of Allah's control and power. Right? Because the reason why they're saying this is because they are saying, how can Allah punish and reward if He is the one who's creating the actions, if He's the one who's decreeing the actions upon mankind? So this means that everything to do with the action, meaning your intention to do it, your desire for it, and you actually doing it, all of it has to come from the servant himself in order for it to be justice, for Allah's reward to be justified, right? So all of that, they consider that to be outside of Allah's creative power. Anything to do with the act itself.
What about the other end as well, Shaykh?
Yeah. Well, the other end, what they do, the way they explain it, is they say, well, man doesn't really have any free will or free choice, but how is he going to be rewarded? Right, so what they say, they come out with this doctrine, and they say, well, because Allah chose this person and his body through which the act was performed, the sin or the righteous deed, Allah will give him the credit. Right, so it's as if Allah is acting through that body, but He just gives that body the credit or the negative mark for the sin or the act of obedience. You understand? So this is how their notion of how do you earn good, how do you earn reward and punishment, right? So to those people over here, they say, well, no, we have to earn it completely outside of Allah's creative power. We are the ones who have to create it ourselves, right? These over here are saying, no, Allah is the doer of everything. But because He chooses to do the deed of righteousness through this body or that body, that will gain a credit. That will gain like a point, so to speak, right? So this is how that person will get rewarded, because Allah chose to do the action through the decree through that person's body. It's in a way they're saying you are forced to do what you are doing, but because your body was the instrument through which that was done and decreed, you will just get a credit for it. You will get like a reward for it. So it's just philosophical. They're trying to reconcile these things without. But in the middle, what we say is, Allah created us, gave us the will, gave us the power. Then we choose to do what we do after Allah has sent us the messengers. Do you understand? Right? Reward and punishment is justified by way of the sending of the messengers. Right? That's how it's justified. So we'll come to that a bit later in the lesson. But yes, to answer your question, everything that comes from the servant in relation to the act, then they consider that to be outside of Allah's creative power. Right? So we'll discuss that later, inshallah, as to why they say that. Okay, so if there's no more questions on that issue, let's move to the second issue. The second issue then is to do with al-Qadar, the good and the evil. So how can you say there's evil in the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?